Alright, game number 4, which is your second game. And in this game you're playing with the black pieces. And it is your beloved French. And probably you're not so beloved French exchange variation. Alright, but well, okay. Gotta deal with it. Here you go knight c6, just a minor thing. The main move is bishop d6. You still want to, I think, remain flexible with this knight. And this is the move you want to play anyway, bishop d6. Okay, knight c6, c3. Also, I found that often this setup where white can play c3, it's quite annoying for this knight on c6 as, well, where to go, right? At some point you need to regroup it anyway. So often maybe it then makes sense to rather develop it to d7, for example. Okay, but not a big deal. Bishop d6, knight e2, knight g7, queen c2. And here you go bishop e6. Which is possible, of course, but I like knight g6 here. And then let's say bishop e3, then queen f6. I like this setup, it looks nice. Knight on g6, queen f6, this looks nice and active. Knight d2, maybe you can even go knight h4 here. Why not? Castle, bishop f5, exchange the bishops, and you don't have any problems here. And just a sample line, I mean, white can play differently, but I like to set up knight g6, queen f6. This bishop e6 looks a little bit, I don't know, doesn't convince me that much. Knight f4, and here you play bishop takes f4. I think this is just strategically not correct. This is the best minor piece you have in this position. Of all the 4 minor pieces you have, this is the best one. It's covering the dark squares, e5, maybe c5. And it's your better bishop because this bishop is restricted by its own pawn on d5, right? So you want to keep it. So let him exchange this one if you have to give a bishop, which you do in this position. So play queen d7, and if knight takes e6, you can either take with the pawn, because white shouldn't take this pawn. You castle long, you go e5, white is heavily underdeveloped, and this is no good. And if he goes f4 to stop e5, okay, then you go still long castle, and still white has to play quite a few moves to finish his development while you have to develop everything, and maybe you can do something like sacrifice a pawn or go after this pawn f4 or df8. If you can get a break in, and I think you can pretty quickly, h6, g5, something like this, and try to open up the position where the white king is still in the center, then why not? And if white castles short, even more so, you go h6, g5, open up the files against the white king on g1. So this looks quite decent. F takes e6. Also queen takes e6 possible, but then okay, you're probably a bit worse here after queen d2 because white has the 2 bishops and you don't have much for it, but still your position is fairly solid. I mean, by taking on f4, you're not only giving up your bishop, but you're also helping white to develop his bishop. Queen e7, knight e2, bishop f5, that's the right plan to exchange the bishop. Well done, takes, castle. And here you're doing fine again for sure. Here you go knight g6, which is possible. You could have also gone h5 immediately, but okay, knight g6 is fine, knight g6, bishop g3, but now I would recommend h5. Okay, you're threatening h4, so white has to react. He goes h4 himself. And then you can regroup this knight, because this knight is not doing much here on c6. Play knight c7, go knight f5. And you want to play on the light squares, obviously, because this is the color of... well, this is the opposite color of the bishop your opponent has. So that's the color you want to play on for sure. And yeah, I think this is completely fine here for you. Okay, also rook d8, f4. But now, this is now the 2 critical moments in the game. White just played f4. Strategically a dubious move, because he's putting a pawn on the same color of his bishop. Actually, he's blocking his bishop on g3. So you need to stop. You need to stop this pawn from advancing to f5, because then suddenly the bishop is open up again. He's pushing back your knight on g6. That would be terrible. And that's what happens in the game. You don't stop him. You need to stop him. You need to stop him. You need to see his plan and stop it. And I mean, he plays f4. He doesn't want to keep his pawn on f4. He wants to put it to f5. So knight c7, either here or after taking on e1. But I think, why not play immediately? Why give up the e file? Knight c7. And now you cannot play f5, you take it, right? So say queen f3, knight f5, bishop f2. He makes a new try. He wants to go g4 and f5, yeah? But now you go knight d6. White cannot take really on d5 because f4 is hanging. And after g4, again he wants to go f5, but you don't let him. You don't let him, you play f5 yourself now, and this is just beautiful. It's just a beautiful position now. You have knight e4 in the air, and you're playing wonderfully on the light squares, and this bishop is just dead meat, not doing anything. No impact. No impact. So yeah, those were the critical moments now in the game, because here now you play rook e8. I think this is, from a practical standpoint, almost a decisive mistake. I mean, your game becomes very, very difficult to play, and that's such an important factor. Sometimes positions can be equal, but for one side the moves are clear and obvious, and for the other side they're not so obvious, and that's often something people don't take into consideration also in the opening. But when you actually play the game, you'll notice the difference. And it can be so important, obviously. So here again you need to go knight c7, and you should be doing completely fine here. But after rook e8, f5 takes f5. Now your knight gets pushed back, and yes, there are not that many pieces left on the board, but this bishop is quite strong on this diagonal, and white has more space on the king side, so he's clearly better here. And for you it's difficult to play. So it took some time here to see what you can do, and it's not that clear what the best plan is, but probably you should do something like this: c6, g4, and now bring the king over to f7. Queen c8 here, stopping in queen b8, and now king f7 to bring the king over there. But still, I mean, white can further improve his position, and you don't have any active counterplay. It's clear that this is quite unpleasant for you. If you could get a knight to e4 somehow, that would be great, but you just can't. You're too restricted. It's not possible. So yeah, I think this was the best plan, to get your king here to help defending the king side, but still difficult position for sure. Also, there's another idea to go king d8, g4 and queen b5 here. Try to get active, but yeah, you're not really getting too active. Your queen alone won't make that much damage, and the problem is you cannot get your knights into the game really. Just no squares available. So yeah, in the game of the king b8, g4, you pretty much just have to wait. Now you play knight h7, you lose some more time. Maybe you can play a move like a6, but at this point it's just, from a practical viewpoint, it's very difficult to defend, obviously. You go queen b5 now, you're trying to become active, but it's just pseudo activity, really not threatening anything. Probably should go back to d7. This seems to be a best square for the queen as it defends all the spots, but anyways. I mean, like I repeated now many times, this is very, very difficult for black. So queen b5, queen f4, queen b6, and your opponent brings the knight to f4, and yeah, now he goes for those pawns, and that's why it would be good to have the king here to help defending for exactly a case like this, right? And your counterplay is just not going anywhere, unfortunately. And white can just pick up the pawns because the queen alone won't make enough damage. I'm thinking though, well, you could have tried b4, but it doesn't change anything. White can just for some more checks. Check, check. Okay, and now white can go to c1, he can go to c3, and you're running out of checks, and queen takes c7 is still there. So nothing to do, unfortunately. So you played queen e7 check, but he goes b4, and you cannot take on f6 because of the checkmate, and you're 2 pawns down, about to lose a third. So you resigned. Yeah, unfortunate. Because if you, at this one moment when he played f4, if you had punished him for this strategic mistake that he made, going f4, you could have had a very pleasant game. But you missed this moment, maybe underestimated the danger of the position after f5, and then you were just in a difficult situation. Because, yeah, the problem was your knights were so restricted, they never got back into a game, right? They just never got to any active squares again till the end of the game after f5 happened. So I guess that was just a misjudgment on your part, it seems to me. All right, I'm reading your comments in the chat. And you're saying that you have never seen this line before with bishop d3, I'm guessing. But I think it's the main move here, bishop d3, stopping bishop f5, as you're saying, yeah. Yeah, and I would just play bishop d6, like I said. And then knight e7 is typical way, bishop f5. Okay, there's some lines, and actually people try it more often these days, but if you know your stuff, should be fine, of course. And later on, also what I want to point out, you thought that e6 might be a weakness. Yes, when you first look at it, it looks like the backward pawn, but here already, black is threatening e5, you're better developed, so white has to do something. He has to go f4, otherwise you go e5 and you're completely fine. And then the question becomes how to evaluate this position, but like I said, with the lead in development you have, it feels like it should be fine. I mean, if white was able to stabilize, play knight d2, knight f3, obviously he cannot even go knight d2 because of bishop takes f4, but if he was to be able to do this and then castle and so on, he would be better. But, well, he can't. So I think you should have something going here. Like I said, I like this plan of h6, g5, something along these lines. Even sacrifice a pawn. Why not? If you're having this lead in development, you want to make something out of it. Ah, you mean this queen c2 idea you haven't seen before. Yeah, I think that's pretty rare to play queen c2 here. Yeah, okay, stopping bishop f5, yes. Okay, but yeah, like I said, this knight g6 and queen f6 plan seems a good way to deal with this. All right. So, time for the conclusion for your two games, King Hunter. Yeah, unfortunately, it seemed to me that you lost the games to a certain degree because of the opening. I mean, the first game for sure, because there, when it was still mainline theory, you deviated, and then you already were with your back to the wall because you had to regain that pawn. And then in this game, you were also a bit worse, I would say, after the opening. And but in this game it was different, because I think there were some strategic mistakes here. First, on your part, giving up your bishop here. I mean, this is the bishop, like I said, this is the minor piece I don't want to exchange. And then after f4 here, not allowing white to play f5 and playing on the light squares. This is the usual strategy. If you have this this situation on the board where you have knights and your opponent has a bishop, you want to play on the opposite colors of the bishop. And in this case, those are the light squares, clearly. Because on the light squares, you're just a piece up. So you want to play on those squares, and you want to not allow him to put his pawns on light squares, I guess. In this case, f5. Right? So I was even considering a move like f5 here, but this wouldn't be such a great choice in this position, because you're not able to get a knight to e4. You see, both knights are 4 squares away from e4, and white can play knight f3, knight e5 pretty quickly, and he would get a protected pass pawn on e5, and he would be better. But even something like this I would consider, just to stop f5 from white. Okay. Yeah, you're saying it's the first where you're getting clear worse openings. Well, I mean, you weren't clearly worse over the opening, but this impacted the rest of the game, clearly. And in both cases, it seemed to me there was a big impact, especially in the first game. This one, not so much, still, but in the first game for sure, yeah. Yeah, and also a good point you're making. This time it wasn't tactics. Yeah, that's really unusual. This time, in both games, there weren't tactics you missed. It was more strategic understanding, and in this game and in the first game, just you didn't get back the pawn in time. You just didn't go after the pawn in time. So I guess you could say there was calculation to a certain degree, because you didn't see maybe that your opponent was able to just hold on to the pawn as he did. But okay, yeah, it wasn't concrete tactics. All right, thanks for sending in the games, and of course thanks for the support, you guys. Very appreciate. I can't talk anymore. Too long.